Hello, my name is Merritt Bucholz, Bucholz McEvoy Architects. We're leading a design team consisting of architects, landscape architects, conservation architects, civil and structural engineers, mechanical and electrical engineers, planners, quantity surveyors, all working together with Dublin City Council and you, the community, to create the new development at Emmet Road in Chicore, Dublin. We've structured our thinking according to these design layers. We've set these out in a research presentation that we made, which you can access via the same website. It's quite a large project, and we find it very useful to structure the design process and the thinking around the project into these different layers and themes so that everybody can understand the different aspects of the project and where they can best input into it. Today we're going to try and work through how these design layers are being developed in the project. We've used our design research pretty directly to develop a master plan that includes all of Inchicore. So the colors relate to the different functions that we attributed to all of the different aspects of Inchicore, sports and playing fields and cemeteries and civic buildings and residences and apartment buildings and houses and gardens and play spaces and ecologies and commercial buildings and spaces and schools and creches and just the tremendous diversity that you find in Inchicore. And we've used the same colors to represent the pieces of the projects so that you can understand them in the same way and relate them to those pieces of the project of the community that are already there. So just to point out the main kind of new facilities that are being designed as part of the project, there's the Civic Hub Library and Community Center, which is located here, the northeast part of the site. It addresses this new civic place, Emmet Place, which gives directly onto Emmet Road. There's a supermarket just here with small retail and community enterprise units fronting onto Emmet Road. There is a cafe, a creche, which is related to the residential development. And in addition to the new civic place along Emmet Road, there's also Richmond Place just in front of Richmond Barracks and Golden Bridge Place just in front of Golden Bridge Cemetery. Of course, this is mainly a place to live, and so the apartments and homes that are being created are represented by the red blocks that are shown on this drawing, and I'll go into the sort of thinking around those in the subsequent slides. Green spaces have formed a big part of our thinking for the new development. The project consists of a series of connected, open, communal spaces for public and residential community to create orienting points that are anchored by the historic fabric around the site and form a pedestrian green north-south spine that connects all of the pieces of the site, but that also connect east-west through the new development to all of the existing wonderful spaces to the east and to the west. The green spaces will be used by the residents and by the community for amenity, of course, and but they're also natural places. They'll be part of the rainwater collection. They'll be part of the ecology. They'll be part of the playscape and playscapes that are being created within the new project. Some of the characteristics of the public realm and the way that we've been thinking about developing them has to do with the connecting the historical elements of the site and stitching the new development into the historical fabric. So you have Richmond Barracks, you have this little piece of wall that remains from the barracks, you have St. Michael's Church, and you have Golden Bridge Cemetery here. together as little pavilion buildings. And all of these, they have some kind of relationship to each other. And we want to provide some sort of structure, but there's also a huge opportunity there to connect and stitch together um, the community using those as kind of orienting points to create these new public spaces um, and these new throughways that connect us across east-west from St. Michael's to Bulfin. There's also a need to create the streets again as urban places. So Vincent Street West and Patriots Path are two really important existing north-south arteries. And Vincent Street West is at the moment, because it has no real buildings, to define it as an edge feels like quite an open place. We want to give it structure and scale by building right along the edge, relatively low, to give it human quality and character as an urban place and kind of return it as a space to the city, slow down the traffic, make it more human and more human scaled. And Patriots Path, which is really a connection of a little pedestrian section here, a road section here, and another little pedestrian section here, all of which have these little angled jogs in them. And they're quite important because they provide a different vista as you're walking up and down Patriots Path. So we want to reinforce that edge and provide the Western kind of structure or component to it, but also we want to keep this little spatial shifts that happen along the edge because they're quite nice and they help you to find a rhythm as you're walking up and down the street. These are some of the sketches and models that we've been using to kind of develop the project, and you can see here perhaps the sketch on the left-hand side, the attempt to weave together the open spaces and the spaces that will have buildings, creating semi-private areas, public areas, connecting spaces, and new public spaces. And then, trying to figure out how they relate to each other spatially and how they stitch the site together and the spaces together from side to side and create movement. We've been working quite a lot in model, and if we were able to do this in person, as it were, we'd all be standing around looking at these models. We've modeled all of Inchicore and placed the project within it, and we've used this to study the massing and the volumetry and the spaces and the rhythm of the spaces and try and really make this a part of the existing fabric so that it feels like it's always been there and always will be there, that it will remain. This is really important. Because this is a development that has quite a few residences in it and follows the Dublin City Development Plan in terms of its guidance around height and around density. We can't really make a project that's 2 or 3 stories high because we simply won't be able to fit the density that's required. At the same time, we feel that it's important not to make walls along the edges of the project. So we've decided to concentrate the height at the center of the site and provide relatively low edges along Vincent Street of 4 and 5 stories, and similarly along Patriots Path of 4, 5, and up to 6 stories. And we also think that within this height we can bring some kind of movement to open the project up to the sun. And it's really important that when we're looking at how the sun passes around the site, you'll see this in some of our later diagrams, but obviously it moves kind of like this. That we need to make sure that we're getting really good daylight, both in terms of the individual apartments, but also in all of the open spaces that are created around the buildings. So that daylight is really a driving force in terms of thinking about the massing strategy and how high things will be. At the same time, to the south of the southern part of the site, we think there's an opportunity to create, first of all, a strong visual connection to the forest of Golden Bridge Cemetery by making a kind of a gap in this in this large green space that runs north-south, so that you can clearly see the trees of Golden Bridge Cemetery and kind of frame by residential buildings that might rise to 6 or 7 stories along the southern perimeter. We've been looking a lot at the how the public realm is made in Inchicore and all of the really beautiful subtleties that meld together street with wall and some of these really nice little slippages in the urban fabric. So this, for example, in the CIE estate, where you just slip behind a wall to come into a footpath that then becomes a road. And are there opportunities to kind of do the same thing with these pieces of existing wall that we have in the in the development area? And then, trying to find out or trying to understand what the quality and nature and proportion of the public spaces and the semi-public spaces of the public realm, the green spaces, and can we give some structure? Can we borrow some of the proportions and structures from the existing green spaces and kind of use them again? I guess our feeling was that Inchicore has such a strength of public spaces that if we could find a way to kind of amplify and increase the intensity of those spaces, this would be of great value. So, as I said, the project has 3 major public spaces, Emmet Place, Richmond Place, and Golden Bridge Place. Now, these names are kind of our names. They're placeholder names that probably will hopefully change as you start to think about what they might be called. Emmet Place is formed by obviously St. Michael's Church, which exists, and then the new library community center building, and then this little community enterprise retail that forms the edge of Emmet Place. Richmond Place, of course, is established by the barracks and Richmond Barracks, but also by the new facades of the apartment buildings, the residential buildings around. And then Golden Bridge Place is formed by a little cafe along this edge, the entrance to the creche along here at Golden Bridge Cemetery and Common Ground, and then the little pavilion buildings, and of course the exit or the entrance into Our Lady of Lourdes Primary School. So they all kind of have different levels of use, or could have different levels of use, but they also relate to different kinds of cultural and heritage and educational and civic functions. And we really think that these are things that the community, I suppose, if we're providing a toolkit or a kind of a Swiss Army knife of different kinds of functional spaces, all of these spaces have potentially slightly different uses depending on or based on where they are and what makes up their edges. And we're also thinking about, well, what are the surfaces like? What are they like as places for ecology? What are they like as places where people recreate and play? What are they like as spaces that celebrate water and nature? So these are all parts of the thinking that's going to inform the development of these spaces, but they're also things that we would like your ideas on. The other aspect of the green spaces is how they become regenerative communal spaces. In other words, how do they serve the community that lives there? So can they become gardens? Are they places that support informal social interactions, like with benches and with seating, using the change in level across the site, which is a very nice kind of gentle sort of terracing that is part of the natural topography that we would be taking advantage of. How can we create semi-private garden spaces within the courtyards, for example, possibly on the rooftops of the grocery store, connected to the community center library building, and the rooftops of the residential buildings, where one could have allotment gardens, things like this. This is all part of our thinking around those spaces, so we would really welcome your ideas on those things. these all form a really strong, these green spaces form a really strong part of the one of our strong aims, which is around encouraging biodiversity and encouraging um, all forms of life to thrive within the new project. And this is really something that we need your thinking on and we need your ideas on because we can provide the space, but we in fact aren't going to be out there gardening. You are. So we'd like to know how that might work. And similarly, water management and how water is dealt with on the site and how it becomes part of people's day-to-day experience with public spaces is really important. How it feeds plants and animals, how it regenerates and recycles, how it's used in the gray water systems on the within the development. These are all things that we're thinking a lot about. And then waste, similarly, um, our thinking, I think like everybody's thinking these days is really, well, there's no place, you can't throw anything away because there is no such thing as away or such place as away. It's all here. So how can we establish a circular waste management system that deals with all of the different components of waste within the project? So we want to provide, and we will be providing spaces in which these things can actually be done. Uh, Along the edges of the building, the buildings and the apartments will be providing buffer spaces, which are attached to or belong to each apartment that opens directly onto a green space. We want to organize play spaces into uh, places of different scale and different levels of intensity and activity. We want to create opportunities for all ages to participate in the public spaces, both next to and away from the residences. Um, we're thinking a lot about the types and species of planting that will be used. For example, using extending this idea of the forest from Golden Bridge Cemetery to the Comic River Valley and Grattan Park, um, but also what kinds of intimacies can be created by the plant life that um, gives shape and form to the public spaces within the green infrastructure. Um, and then I spoke about water recycling. We think of this as an infrastructural component because so much water falls on the site and can be used by the development. So we're really thinking about how that gets organized, and you can see in this drawing along the edges of the building will be um, organizing the flow of rainwater, the collection of rainwater, and the use then of that water within the project so that people can understand that water is a part of life and a part of their daily encounters with the place. This also will come into how we think about making the buildings, the facades, the roofs, the entrances, that this feeding of the green infrastructure by the green ecology by the blue infrastructure will be a constant kind of driving factor within how we develop the detail of how we're making and composing some of the particular elements. We're very interested that the communal open spaces are seen as play spaces and play spaces that are for all activities and all age groups. So obviously there will be playgrounds, which are geared at children or young children, but also there need to be spaces for teenagers, there need to be spaces for young adults and for the elderly, there need to be spaces for sport and fitness and for learning, for education, for relaxation, for recreation. All of these need to be catered for. So we're starting to think about the granularity of those spaces and how they might be organized in relation to, say, the public spaces that I spoke about earlier at Richmond Place, at Golden Bridge Place, and along Emmet Road, but also the semi-public spaces and how these different levels of intimacy and use of public space, maybe with the creche, for example, or with a little indoor community room that opens to an outdoor community room, all work together. we're very keen that the project be connected to the locale in terms of walking, that it become a conductor rather than a inhibitor of people's movement. And so we made this drawing that kind of shows how the project will participate in the, extending the 5-minute um, walking diagram and 5-minute cycling diagram. We want the project to feel like it's part of the connectedness of being in Inchicore, and focusing on some of the really key points of intersection with the public transportation network, such as the Lewis and the Bus Connects, but also providing a really sophisticated and enhanced level of bicycle parking, and mobility in the form of a mobility hub for the residences and a community car park for the neighborhood. So we've looked a lot at the specific location, for example, for bicycle parking and storage. We feel that following the development plan and the new residential guidelines, a very high level of bicycle parking needs to be provided, but it's not really just about the number of spaces. It's about how they're linked to the new cycleways and greenways that are developing and exist and are being built. Um, it's about providing safe, secure, indoor bicycle parking, which is dry and well lit and heated, and is directly accessible to each of the apartment cores, so that using your bike is exactly like using your car, in the sense that it has, in fact, it will be even better because it will be dry, it will be well lit, it will be indoors, and it will be normal. And I think this is really important in order to make it possible for people to choose to use things like bicycles. They need to be treated uh, better than we treat something like a motor vehicle. So we have associated large bicycle parking rooms with each of the cores, which are dedicated for the residents, as well as a very high number of visitor parking for bicycles. And I suppose the other um, key aspect to mobility is around safety, and around creating a public realm in which it's safe to walk and safe to use your bike, both during the day and at night. So this is about making sure that the spaces are well lit, that people can see and recognize each other, that there aren't hidden corners, that there aren't places where you're not sure exactly what's going on, that spaces are plain and easy to understand, that they're human scaled, that there is a high level of visibility and recognizability and coherence within the spaces, that they're well connected to each other and to the surrounding environment, that they're well connected to the street and road network. These are all really important things, and reinforcing um, the quality and character of the road edges, and forming strong civic spaces is a key aspect to making a pedestrian and public realm which is safe and secure. There will be car parking within the development, so a large part of the thinking around mobility is about accommodating all of the different forms of vehicular ownership and use and how that's changing. So as we're moving away from the era of everybody owning a car or two, and towards an era of shared mobility, towards an era of new forms of motors, such as electric vehicles that need to be charged in situ or on site, at their parking stations. All of that is part of how we're thinking about mobility. So we're concentrating the bulk of the car parking spaces into a village car park, which is underneath the shopping center, and I guess the grocery store. And it's important to say that the grocery store, because it's relatively large, has a floor plate that is a kind of a fixed dimension. Under the development plan, the number of parking spaces that's permitted with the grocery store in this location is relatively limited at about 20. So we can fit a few more than that underneath the grocery store in the undercroft. So there will be the balance of parking spaces are between 55 and 65 located at the underneath the grocery store part of the site is a community car park and a village sort of hub for mobility at which you'll have the possibility to um, use a shared car scheme or charge an electric vehicle. At the same time, there's dedicated mobility hubs between each of the residential blocks, which will have a very limited number of dedicated residential car parking spaces, about 50, plus universal access spaces. But these will be mixed really with the shared car schemes and electrical vehicle charging points in these mobility hubs between the residences devoted to the residences. So the whole idea about mobility is to try and share it across all of the different forms that exist to connect us into connect the development into the existing public transportation networks and cycleways that have been created and are being created, um, and give people the maximum amount of choice and the maximum benefit from the way that they can move around the from their homes to their places of work and their places of education and their places of leisure and so on. So this is a high-level axonometric diagram that gives a kind of idea of the heights. I had said earlier that we had concentrated the taller parts of the scheme down the center of the site, and this is really so that you see, as I draw the sun path across the scheme, that we get maximum daylight into both the residences and into the public spaces around the residences, all of the green spaces around the residences. So along Vincent Street West, it remains relatively low at mainly 4 stories, a few bits at 5, and then along Patriots Path, um, there's some lower pieces stepping up to 4 to 6, 7 stories with these taller buildings kind of overlooking the cemetery with this large opening between them that connect this view to this north-south green space to Golden Bridge Cemetery. And then you can see the community center library building here at the north, the existing sports community building, the community and enterprise and retail space, and then behind that the grocery store on the first floor. And you see it then on top here, the garden, which will be connected to the community center library building and also to the uh, Richmond Place via a connection at the corner here. So the heights in the scheme will vary from between 4 and possibly up as high as 10 floors. These are things that are still very much under consideration, so we'd really welcome your views on those things. In terms of the potential synergies between the community center library building and the existing sports community building in Golden Bridge Cemetery, Richmond Barracks, sorry, we've been really thinking about how all of those could kind of work as a campus together. And what are the synergies of all of these spaces when brought together? We have the sports community building, which has a sports hall, Richmond Barracks, which has an exhibition and venue hall, plus a series of smaller spaces that are used as a library at the moment and a cafe. Um, how can we complement those spaces with the community center library building, and how can we think of the things that maybe aren't provided by those spaces and the things that are provided by those spaces so we don't sort of double up? So we've been thinking about the community venue as a space that should have a dimension that can accommodate different kinds of things, but in particular music and drama and performance should be able to be accommodated there. So it can't really be the size of a basketball court. Plus, you've got a basketball court in the community center sports building, so you don't really need another basketball court. But it could be half the size of a basketball court, so it could be used as a half basketball court. In other words, it could still the community venue could still have a sports function, but that its kind of driving forces would be more towards community events, towards music, towards performance, towards possibly other things like markets, events that are sponsored by the community. So this really gets us into thinking about the dimension of that space. You know, how big should it be? What kind of a height should it have? What span should it have? So we've been looking carefully at that. At the same time, a community venue needs to be connected to the rest of the development and in Shakur, and we're kind of thinking of this as I guess, a living room or a space that is kind of like the front door, which has a cafe, but also can exhibit things, can handle some small events. It's welcoming, it's friendly, and we've been looking a lot, at the community center in Inchicore, the existing one, because what's quite interesting about it, of course, is that you enter in and you're in a kind of a dining room, living room with a kitchen off it, and this feels to us very comfortable. So this is kind of an idea that we think is worth picking up on, and we've been looking then at other community center buildings such as the really great Sean O'Casey Community Center by O'Donnell and Toomey, or the wonderful Brickworks in London, the MAC in Belfast. So there's some great examples, Samuel Beckett Civic Campus that we worked on, that really kind of show what could happen in these spaces. Those are kind of ground floor spaces. So above in the community center and the upper floors, what else should happen? So we need to have multi-use rooms that where you can do dance and yoga and aerobics, and you can have functions and cooking demonstrations and ukulele lessons and so on. But where small groups can meet, where people groups as low as 2 people or as high as 30 people or 40 people can meet comfortably. Um, and then where can we have, maker spaces, spaces that, where you have machines and equipment that might have special environmental requirements, 3D printers, laser cutters, that kind of thing. And how accessible should that be to the youth of the area in particular? And how can they be used to kind of leverage the creativity and interest that young people have in technology? Um, so in terms of the other design layers, such as resiliency and quality and value over time, what we've really been putting a lot of thought into is how we're going to build these things out of. We know that, in 2021, we cannot continue to build out of the kind of materials that we've been building out of for the last 40 years. We can't afford it environmentally. It's not really possible. So we're really thinking about how we can build this out of wood, how we can build it using design for manufacture techniques, how we can use it how we can build it using prefabricated modular construction, but in a way which is really leveraging the technology to ensure that the entire place is built with care and with a high level of precision, and with very low tolerance joints, optimizing prefabrication, and the more you design before you get to the site, the better the site goes. And this has always been our experience. And with such new materials as prefabricated timber and mass timber construction, this is possible at a speed and at a scale, but also with an environmental lightness and responsiveness to the demand that we live under to reduce carbon. Um, Particularly embodied carbon, um, in our construction techniques. At the same time, all of these apartments have to be built to be incredibly energy efficient. So we're thinking about a single energy system. We're thinking about things like air tightness. We're thinking about things like the U value and the performance of the building fabric, but we're also really thinking about the sun, because the sun drives everything. So to make sure that all of the apartments have good daylight, that they're heated by the sun, that they have good ventilation, that the inside and the outside can be brought together through the daily cycle of people's lives, and people can choose to open and close their terraces and their gardens and their living spaces to and within each other. So this is how we're thinking about quality and value over time. So that's the end of the presentation. Thank you.